This morning, we're going to continue our series titled Acceptance, primarily out of the book of Ecclesiastes, but we'll look at a few other passages today as well. Last week, we learned the importance of accepting our toil as a gift, and I hope you found that beneficial. I hope there was some mundane task that you did this last week that you managed to enjoy more just by deciding that that was the task God had given you to do. Just yesterday, I had purchased a rick of firewood and was unloading it and asked my son Lucas to help me unload it. And I was unloading it, trying to remember Ecclesiastes with a smile on my face, and noticed my sermon hadn't quite got all the way down to Lucas, who was not as thrilled, understandably, to be unloading firewood. But I enjoyed it immensely. It just didn't, translate well across the whole family. But there was one task at least that I thought, hey, God gave me this. This is something to do, and I did it. And I tried really hard to remember that lesson of accepting that I'm able to do this thing as a gift of God all on its own. Buried in the verses we mentioned last week, there was another phrase that I want to draw out this week. This is a passage we read last week, Ecclesiastes chapter 3 and verse 22. So I saw that there is nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his work, for that is his lot. Who can bring him to see what will be after him? That is his lot. You may use the expression, that's just my lot in life. Or maybe you don't. Maybe it's an odd Bible phrase you're not familiar with. But it's not only found here, it's found in the parallel passage 2 chapters later that we also mentioned. Ecclesiastes chapter 5 and verse 18. Behold, what I have seen to be good and fitting is to eat and drink and find enjoyment in all the toil with which one toils under the sun, the few days of his life that God has given him, for this is his lot. What you have to do right now is a lot given you by God. In the next verse, it repeats it again. Everyone also to whom God has given wealth and possessions and power to enjoy them and to accept his lot and rejoice in his toil, this is the gift of God. So 3 times there in what we covered last week, that little expression found its way in. I overlooked it each time because I wanted to save it for this Sunday. What does it mean to say, I accept my lot in life? What does that expression mean, and how does it apply to us as Christians? What does it mean to accept my lot? The Hebrew term is helek, for what it's worth, and it means just exactly what it says in English. There were no hidden treasures there for me to dig up. As I looked at the word, it translates roughly as portion or share or territory. It means roughly the same thing it means in English when you say lot in a real estate transaction. If you buy a city lot, you are buying a region of space, of territory, of land that is bounded by some boundary, a fence, or an imaginary line that a surveyor set. If you buy a city lot, you do not own the city of Ada. You cannot build anywhere you want in the city of Ada. You can't even build on your neighbor's property 1 foot over that line. You are buying rights to do what you want on a lot, on a specified little amount of ground that belongs to you to do with as you please, more or less, and that's your lot. That's exactly what the expression means in Hebrew. It's a little piece of land or territory or property that belongs to you. In Genesis, for example, there's a story told in the story of Jacob. Jacob and Laban didn't get along super well. There is some finagling and trickeration going on in the story of Jacob about what kind of property he's going to inherit from Laban and so forth. He marries Laban's 2 daughters, which also involves some deceit and trickery. But at the end, there's a discussion of how much is going to be inherited and who the sons of Laban expect to have their share. Jacob has negotiated for the daughters' share, which are his wives, and there's this discussion going on. And in verse 14, Rachel and Leah answered and said to him, "Is there any portion or inheritance left to us in our father's house?" Well, what portion has been left to us? Again, it's a simple term. If you've ever had an inheritance doled out, maybe with the passing of a parent, you know exactly how that works. There is X amount of property or funds or possessions or whatever, and maybe you'd like all of it, or maybe you'd like some of it. Maybe you'd like none of it, I don't know. But the inheritance says you get your lot. You get your portion. It's divided up among several people. You get what you get and you don't throw a fit. That's the simple meaning of the word lot. So just from the definition of the word, before we even get into Leviticus, Ecclesiastes, I've been teaching Leviticus for 3 weeks to the Ukrainians, so if I slip into Leviticus instead of Ecclesiastes, I apologize. Before we even get to Ecclesiastes, the first lesson we learn, accepting my lot means knowing that I don't get everything I want. And we mean that in the biggest way possible. When we teach children that, it's simple. You get this much and you don't get everything you want. With adults, it's kind of harder. It means whatever accomplishments you hope to accomplish, whatever things you want to do with your life, how you want to spend your time, you can't do everything, and you can't have everything. You can be at one place at a time, doing one thing at a time. From the day you're born to the day you die, you will not live forever. You cannot do everything. And if you want to do anything, you're going to have to say no to a few things you might have liked to have done. A few goals that you can't pursue because you pursued something else first as more important. When we accept that we are not the God and master of the universe, that we have a certain portion in this life, that is our life itself, we are accepting that we don't get everything we want. And by the way, that's actually good for us. If we got everything we wanted, it would crush us. We couldn't handle it. And so God, in infinite wisdom, gives us our lot. He draws the little boundary and says, this is what Ben's life is going to amount to. And He gives me some freedom within those boundaries to make some choices and to invest my time and energy and resources in different things. I get to decide that each and every day. But there are boundaries, and I don't get everything I want. I think, actually, there are several passages, even without the word lot in it, in Ecclesiastes that point to this idea. One comes from Ecclesiastes chapter 7, where I'll take several thoughts today. Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 13 says it this way, "Consider the work of God, who can make straight what He has made crooked?" And again, this is one of those times when I have to remind you, remember that Bible writers are allowed to tell jokes and even be sarcastic from time to time, right? I don't think he's saying, God made a mistake, who can fix it? That's not the point. God doesn't make mistakes. Point is, sometimes when I look at things, the way I look at them is so crooked that sometimes I think what God did is crooked, right? When I was in middle school, finally, for the first time in life, an eye doctor diagnosed me as having a pretty severe astigmatism, and he gave me some contact lenses that corrected not just for my sightedness, but for the astigmatism that I had. And when he gave them to me, he said, listen, you're going to put these on, and you're going to think everything is crooked. I said, what do you mean? He said, you're going to look at cabinets and think things are going to roll off the shelf. I said, I don't understand. He says, Ben, the way you have seen the world has been so wrong for so long. When you see it right for the first time, you're going to be very confused, but it will get corrected over time and you'll get used to it. And sure enough, I put those contact lenses in, and I thought I was looking like this for like a week. I would walk around and I'd kind of like be afraid to run into things, or I'd put something on a cabinet and then wait for it to roll off. The way I saw things had been so skewed for so long because of that astigmatism that seeing it correctly was disorienting. We look at the world God has made, and He says, it is good. And we look at it and say, you sure about that? Our perspective is so skewed that we look at things and say, it looks kind of crooked. What the author of Ecclesiastes says, if it was crooked, do you think you could fix it? If God had just decided that cabinet's going to slant, if He had said, I'm going to draw this boundary over here and it's going to be crooked and windy and make no sense whatsoever. If God had made everything just as wrong as you think He did, do you think you could fix it? And of course the answer is no. That's not my lot. When you're given a lot, you don't get to say, I don't like that line. I'm going to move it over there on my neighbor property a few feet. People try that. It's against the rules. Whatever the line is where the line is, and you don't get to change it. In Paul's sermon to the Athenians in Acts chapter 17, he makes a very similar comment about human history. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place. You know why national boundaries are where they are? You could say, well, because there was a war fought in a certain year and it went this way or that way, or the river went this way and it went that way. You can say all that, but Paul says, well, that's because that's where God put it for now. That sometimes it is what it is because God made it that way. And all the fretting and scheming we do to try to change things, Paul says that is where God put it, and that's where it's going to be until he puts it somewhere else. Accepting my lot means knowing that my lot is not up to me. I don't get everything I want, and it's not up to me what I get. I don't get to say, I know I don't get everything, but I would really like these things. I have to have these goals accomplished in my life, or I will not be satisfied. That may not be within the boundaries of what God has given you to do. There are some choices you get to make, but it's not an infinite set of choices. We don't have complete freedom to do whatever we want. Accepting my lot means there is something God has made it possible for me to do, and I should look to do that. But it may not be everything, and it's not up to me. Even if I think it's crooked, God made it straight, and I couldn't fix it if I wanted to. Later in Ecclesiastes, he says, in the day of prosperity, be joyful. In the day of adversity, consider. God has made the one as well as the other, so that man may not find out anything that will be after him. When things go really well, we say to God, thank you for your magnificent gifts. When things go very badly, we say, God, what are you doing up there? Ecclesiastes says, this is what God has given you. Or maybe we say when things are going really well, thank you, God, for what you're doing. When things go badly, we blame somebody else. Ecclesiastes doesn't even do that. He says when hard times come, maybe God wants you to learn from that. Maybe he wants you to know your limitations. What's that last bit say? So that man may not find out anything that will be after him. Keep track of that phrase. It's going to come back on us in just a minute. That the control I have over life is less than I might think. And both good and bad are opportunities that God has given me. Accepting my lot means being satisfied with whatever God gives me today. There are going to be days where you are as happy as they come, where everything lines up and everything goes your way. They're not all going to be like that. There are going to be days where you are miserable, where it seems like the sole purpose of the universe is to torment you. They're not all going to be like that either. You get some of each and a whole lot of days somewhere in between. These are the kinds of times and experiences God gives us to shape our lives and our characters. Accepting my lot means accepting that this is what God has given me to be benefited by and to grow from in the days of my life. In my vain life I have seen everything, says the writer. There is a righteous man who perishes in his righteousness. There is a wicked man who prolongs his life in his evil doing. This line is a reminder. This isn't a complaint, by the way. The first time you read Ecclesiastes, it sounds like he's complaining about everything. Second and third time you read it through, you realize he's accepting these statements as just what it means to be a creature made by God. I looked at the world and I say, this is the way I think it ought to turn out. Remember that last verse we read? So that you can't find it out all the way to the end? Here he says, I tried to figure out how it's going to end, and I saw a righteous man, and I said, clearly that man's living right, God will reward him, and it turned out pretty poorly. And then I saw a wicked man, and I said, surely God will strike that man dead, and he didn't. He seemed to come out okay. And what do you learn from that? Accepting my lot means accepting the uncertain mystery of outcomes in life. Every time we try to predict the future, it is an expression of our human pride and our unwillingness to accept that we don't know what's coming anyway. I've done it all my life. I'm trying to quit, but it's hard. I've done it in every sort of thing. We'll talk politics for a minute, but not politically. This is about how bad I am at it, not about political parties. Everyone understand? 2012, I was quite certain. I had looked at the statistics. I was sure of the math. Mitt Romney was going to defeat Barack Obama. He did not. 2016, I was quite certain that Donald Trump would not win the Republican primary. He did. I was quite certain he was going to win that time. He did not. And this year, I've decided I have no idea what I'm talking about. So if you ask me who's going to be the next president, I don't even know who's running. I've given up trying. I have no idea what's going on. Whatever I say, the opposite happens, and sometimes I think God does that on purpose. During COVID, folks, I predicted the end of COVID 27 times. And I am beginning to believe, I'm not saying that God picks on me, but I am beginning to believe there towards the end that every time I predicted it was over, God would add 6 more months to teach me a lesson. So at some point, I just stopped saying it, and it finally did end, right? Sort of. So it just kind of petered out and went away. But every time I said, I think we're almost there, folks, we would have a flare up and the numbers go up, and I would look silly. This is what I'm slowly learning. It's only taken my entire life. I have no idea what's going on. Even within my little boundaries, I have little enough control. Who do I think I am predicting what's going on in the grand scheme of things? I can barely plan my lot. I'm definitely not the city planner. God is the master of the universe, and when I look at things, I think I can see what's going to happen, and there's just an uncertainty to it. You have to stop tying your satisfaction and your happiness and your sense of security to outcomes you're predicting. You have to instead tie it to the God who knows all things and does things well. Surely there is not a righteous man on earth who does good and never sins. That one came out of nowhere, but it's on the same theme. What's he trying to say? What if it was up to you? What if for a day God said, Ben, you've done such a great job. You're in charge of everything today. How would that go? I don't live up to my own standards, let alone God's. I am a failure and a sinner. There's a reason I'm not in charge. Accepting my lot means recognizing, even personally, my own failures. That even with the little tiny piece of the universe and the little tiny span of time and the little tiny bit of influence that God has given me, I haven't done a particularly good job with that all the time, or even most of the time. Accepting my lot means knowing that even with how little He's given me, I've not done a great deal. And I would be a fool to tell Him I could handle the rest. Accepting my lot means knowing I need grace even for the little bit of responsibility He's given me. And so do you. Do not take to heart all the things that people say, lest you hear your servant cursing you. Your heart knows that many times you yourself have cursed others. Again, this is a verse, seems like it comes out of nowhere. It's the same theme. Previous verse said, you aren't going to go and meet your own standards. Next verse is, you're definitely not going to meet other people's standards. And again, it's kind of a joke. Don't listen too closely to your servants. They're cussing you. We got great technology now. We can monitor our kids' devices and see what they're doing on them. And sometimes I go, I didn't want to know that. My kid thinks I'm dumb. He's right, I am dumb, but I didn't need to know that, right? Don't listen too close to your kids. They're going to cuss you. What's the point of the little proverb? The point is, hey, if you try to live up to other people's standards, you're going to be severely disappointed. If every time somebody says you shouldn't have done it that way, you change your mind, that's not going to work out either. The first point was making yourself as God. It's equally foolish to make somebody else as God, because they are also a sinner who is failing with their lot in life. And so the text says you need to remember it can't be entirely on your shoulders. It's definitely not on your neighbor's shoulders. You've been given something to do, and that's what you've got to focus on. Accepting my lot means worrying less about the opinions of others. God has given me something to do, and He is the only one I have to satisfy in my life. Finally, this morning as we wrap up, we'll leave Ecclesiastes just for a moment, because I think there's one more point worth mentioning in the Old Testament about this idea of accepting my lot, and it comes from the original division of lots. We have to learn a little something from the priest of old. The idea of lot comes from the idea of division of property. God had made a promise to Abraham. I'm going to give you a land called Israel. I'm going to give you this, well, he didn't call it Israel, but he says, I'm going to give you a land, which we now know as Israel. I'm going to give you an inheritance, and it will be for you and your children. Years passed, generations passed, centuries passed, and the children of 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 Abraham come into the land. But there's a lot of them now. Whatever had been promised to Abraham now has to be divided. Originally, the plan was, well, there's 12 sons of Jacob. We'll divide it 12 ways. That'll be perfect. Even that plan didn't work out real well. And here's why. Joseph doesn't get a tribe. But before you get excited and say, well, now there's 11, Joseph had 2 sons, and they both got a tribe. So now there's 13. Imagine it's time to divide up the inheritance with your family, and I just start adding kids that you have to share with. That's no fun. So God says, no problem. I've got it worked out. He goes to Aaron, who was the high priest, and he was of the tribe of Levi. And here's the way God sorts it out. The Lord said to Aaron, you shall have no inheritance in their land, neither shall you have any portion among them. I am your portion, and your inheritance among the people of Israel. Instead of redividing it up 13 ways, he said, we're going to keep it at 12. The Levites get nothing. Nothing? Nothing. Not 1 inch of ground anywhere in Palestine belonged to the tribe of Levi. Does that mean they went away empty-handed? No. God says, this is your portion, this is your gift. You get me. You get to be my priest. You get to serve as closely as anyone can serve to God himself. Not an inch of ground, but a relationship worth more than any ground belongs to you. I will be your portion. Through the years then, Israel began to learn that that was a greater gift than any land could ever be. In the Psalms, on the best day, when his cup was running over, David would say, the Lord is my chosen portion and my cup. You hold my lot. What's he trying to say? I'm a king, I have wealth, I have gold, but the portion I want in life is God himself, not the things that he gives me. Skip ahead to the worst day. This was maybe the best day in Israel's history. What about the worst day, when the cup isn't running over, when the cup is empty? The book of Lamentations, Jeremiah the prophet is mourning for the fall of the city of Jerusalem. And he says the exact same words. The Lord is my portion, says my soul, therefore I will hope in him. Today the cup is empty. Nebuchadnezzar's taken my land and Israel owns nothing. But if God is still my portion, I have plenty. God is my portion and God is my lot. The New Testament Christians in the early days of their service to God learned how important this is. When they dedicated their lives to Christ, they began to be persecuted. And how did they view the loss of their possessions? But recall the former days, says Hebrews, when, after you were enlightened, you endured a harsh struggle with sufferings, sometimes being publicly exposed to reproach and affliction, and sometimes partners with those so treated. For you had compassion on those in prison, and you joyfully accepted the plundering of your property, since you knew that you yourselves had a better possession and an abiding one. You traded the portion of your property, you traded what you had collected, and you traded it in for something better, and you had God. Where did they learn that? Yes, they had learned it, I think, from the Levites of old, but they had also learned it from Jesus Christ, who taught us that if we have God, we have all that we need. Let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. He prayed a famous prayer in Gethsemane. If it be at all possible, remove this cup from me. And there's that cup. David's cup was running over, and it was running over with good things. Jesus looked in his cup, and he didn't like what was in there. It looked like a cup of pain and suffering, and he was right. If it be at all possible, I'd like a different lot. If it's possible, if there's some other portion you could give me, I would love to trade. But above all else, not my will, but thine be done. That's what it means to accept our lot. It means to accept God as all that we need. Would you bow with me in prayer? Our Father and our God, help us in humility to accept you as all that we need. Do not allow us to be content in any possession or gift that you give us. Make us turn to you and be dependent on you for all that we have and all that we are. Help us to see and know our boundaries. Help us to know they are from you. Help us to live as you would have us to live. Help us to be as your Son, Jesus, in whose name we pray. Amen.